Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to all of you all for your time yesterday and also today. And as I address some of my questions, please accept them in the spirit with which they are asked, which is to try to make our armed services more lethal and more effective. And so I'm going to start with General Eifler with the recent news that 2 black and 2 female 1-star, those who were to be promoted to 1-star general officers were denied that promotion by Secretary Hegseth, who unilaterally blocked that process. First of all, do you have any idea why that happened?
Thanks, Congresswoman. I do not know. I do not know. As far as our process, we hold the boards. It's validated by the secretary to make sure everything is done properly, and then he forwards the list.
And so what is the validated by the secretary process? What does doing something properly mean?
Just to make sure that the board was conducted in accordance with our standards. And that's really it. So he does that. There's a vetting, as you all know, to make sure there's no negative or derogatory things that they've done, and then it's forwarded. And that's the last time we see it.
So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I grew up in a military family. My dad was retired as a captain in the Navy, a P-3 pilot, and I was kind of witness to his promotion board cycles. At one point, I think he was one of the youngest captains ever in a peacetime, Navy. And I just can't even imagine a process where the vetting doesn't end up with a really good product, meaning people who are promoted because they deserve it, and it's an enormously competitive process, especially for general officers. Is that correct?
That's correct, Rank.
So how do 4 officers squeak through somehow with something that would be worthy of the Secretary of Defense knocking the decision out of the hands of the people who make these decisions?
Yeah, I do not know the answer to that, Congresswoman. I just don't know.
And so what does this do to those who are 06 and above, or maybe even 05 and above, in terms of their understanding of their career path when something like this happens to derail the career of somebody that they perhaps knew or served with?
Yeah, it questions. It makes you wonder because you don't know.
It makes you wonder what?
Well, why?
Why did that happen?
Why?
Yeah, and what went wrong? And in addition, when we focus on merit, which I believe very strongly in a merit-based promotion system, when they've made it all the way through that merit-based process and been vetted at the end, and then it's taken away from them, which I think is historically unprecedented, I think it can't but not cause pause in the general officer rank in terms of what's happening in their careers. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's fair.
Before I move on with the remainder of my time, this was a recent incident, but there's been close to a dozen incidents where sitting members, general officers, have been relieved of their duty. Would love to hear from the Admiral and the generals. Were you friends with any of the people who experienced that when they were let go?
Ranking Member Houlihan, I was friends with a number of these officers, and I consider them all best and fully qualified and vetted and ran through the system. They're lethal operators and quality human beings, and we serve at the pleasure of the President, ma'am.
I very much respect that. It was how I was raised as well. But serving at the pleasure of the president implies that there's some sort of qualification that they don't have by which he decides or she decides that they are no longer useful. And as near as I can tell to a person, none of those people has anybody identified what was the problem with those people. Is that a fair statement, General Miller?
Yes, ma'am. I think that several of the individuals that were removed from the Air Force, and the chairman was a airman. There was no reason that was provided to us as to why they were removed. A lot of the discussion was that they decided to retire early. I don't know.
And what does that do to morale in the Air Force amongst the general officers?
To be quite fair, it's challenging. We want to make sure that we have the best force, and I've known several of them, and I thought they were great leaders.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate your candor. And General, do you have anything to add to this conversation? Any ways that we might be able to correct for this so that we don't end